What if I told you that the story of the Ukrainian war didn't begin in 2022? In this video, I'll uncover why this war truly began, how geography, history, ambition, and yes, even hesitation collided to ignite one of the most defining conflicts of our century. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why Ukraine became the battlefield of the 21st century, why Russia acted the way it did, and why the world's response or its hesitation will shape the future far beyond this war. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and share our videos. So why Ukraine? For centuries, Ukraine has been called the breadbasket of Europe. Its black soil fed continents. Ukraine's factories armed the Soviet Union, but Ukraine is more than fields and steel. It's a crossroads, a bridge between Europe, Russia, and Asia. Whoever holds Ukraine controls the Black Sea, and with it, the routes to Europe, the Caucasus, and the Caspian oil fields. During World War II, Hitler understood Ukraine's importance perfectly. His armies advanced eastward to seize Ukrainian grain and Donbas coal, resources meant to feed the Reich and fuel its war machine. My own grandfather, Yeva Aleksanyan, fought on Ukrainian front from the Soviet part of the side. For millions in the Soviet Union, Ukraine was not just geography, it was survival. After the World War II came the Cold War. NATO rose to contain the Soviet Union and inevitably resource routes. As long as the USSR stood strong, NATO could not move east. But when the Soviet Empire collapsed, the map began to shift. 1999 was the first year of NATO's expansion, when Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined NATO. In 2004, many more countries joined NATO. Those were Bulgaria, Romania, the Baltic states, Slovakia, and Slovenia. NATO's borders now touched Russia itself. For Moscow, this wasn't normal expansion, it was encirclement. Then came Bucharest 2008. This was when it was declared that Georgia and Ukraine would one day join NATO. To Russia, that was a red line. Months later, Russian tanks rolled into Georgia. So began the 5-day war in Caucasus, in Georgia. Abkhazia and South Ossetia were occupied. That was followed by Russia's recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states, followed by the deployment of Russian troops on the ground. It was an unmistakable military reply to NATO and a blunt message to the West. Russia is prepared to use force to halt NATO's advance. The warning was clear. Any country bordering Russia that moves towards NATO will feel the consequence. And how did the West respond? Largely with words and limited sanctions, and certainly not with military. It was not a strong countermeasures. To Moscow, that restraint sent a powerful signal. The West feared a direct military clash and would not risk full-scale confrontation. That lesson that the West preferred sanctions over boots on the ground became a central factor in Putin's calculations before the annexation of Crimea and the later larger invasion of Ukraine. Then there was the issue of Syria. To clearly see what happened, let's go to Washington 2013. America is exhausted. Decades of war have drained its resources, its money, and its political will. Iraq and Afghanistan. Those wars have cost the United States an estimated $2 trillion. The public is worn out. Americans are tired of fighting wars in some distant places. Congress is tired too. President Obama had campaigned on one clear promise: no new wars. And this is when Syria happened, and Putin was closely watching. In 2012, President Obama drew a line. He publicly announced that if Assad uses chemical weapons, that would be a red line for America. And what did Assad do? In August 2013, Assad crossed that line. Chemical weapons were used. Over 1,000 people, including many children, died. Of course, the world expected a reaction, a strong action, at least a strike against Assad's forces, but President Obama did not launch strikes. Instead, his administration chose diplomacy, a deal brokered with Russia by Russia to move Syria's chemical arsenal. That choice was shaped by real limits, the fear of an open-ended war, the huge cost of deeper Middle East involvement, and a Congress unwilling to back another large military operation. Still, America's red line had been crossed, and America did not respond with force. Instead, it negotiated with the man who crossed that line. And Assad, the man who crossed America's red line, stayed in power and, in time, continued the same brutal tactics. Imagine you're in the Kremlin, watching that unfold. What does it look like from there? It looks like a clear signal to Putin. This signal says the United States prefers deals over boots on the ground. It prefers limits to escalation. The signal is clear. The United States fears long wars. For Putin, this was most likely a sign of weakness. This understanding would be very important in what followed. In late 2013, just months after Syria, something else erupted, this time in Ukraine. Ukraine had long sat in Russia's orbit. But inside the country, two directions were pulling, towards the west and towards Russia. Those tensions exploded in November 2013, when President Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Moscow president of Ukraine, refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union at the last minute. He turned back to Russia. Anger swelled. People poured into Kyiv's Maidan. Protests became clashes became bloodshed, and by February 2014, the crisis reached a breaking point. Yanukovych fled. This was a revolution. Ukraine signaled it wanted a new direction towards Europe, towards the West. That was exactly the moment Moscow feared. For Putin, losing Ukraine was not abstract, it was strategic. Control Ukraine and you control the Black Sea, key ports, grain routes, energy corridors. Control Ukraine and you control access between Europe, the Caucasus, and Asia. Putin could not afford to lose Ukraine, and certainly not its strategically vital footholds. He would not sit and watch how Ukraine, which is so crucial to Russia's security and influence, slipped away. He would not allow that to happen. He would act. Remember what he had just watched in Syria. The United States hesitated to enter Syria. If Washington was unwilling to risk a major military engagement in the Middle East, would it really want to risk a direct confrontation with Russia over Ukraine? The political will simply wasn't there. Europe, too, had its limits. European economies depended on Russian gas and oil, a leverage Moscow knew how to use. And besides, Ukraine was not a NATO member. No treaty obliged the West to send troops. Left without guarantees, Ukraine stood exposed. So all that remained was to choose the right moment. The right moment came in the spring of 2014, immediately after the Ukrainian Revolution. There was a power vacuum in Ukraine, in Kyiv. State institutions were weak. The economy was in crisis. Political forces were split and exhausted. In short, Ukraine was fragile, disorganized, and vulnerable. Those conditions are an invitation for outside influence. When a country's government is unstable and its security services are distracted, it becomes much harder to defend borders and maintain order. So Russia began arming and financing separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. It was proxy violence, then masked troops, invasion of Crimea, then finally a managed referendum in Crimea, and Crimea was annexed in a matter of weeks. With Crimea's annexation, Russia gained direct control over Sevastopol, the Black Sea's most important naval base. With Crimea's annexation and control of Sevastopol, Russia secured a strategic military foothold, a gateway to the Black Sea and wider region. Putin had calculated carefully. He watched the West's hesitation and concluded the price of reversing Crimea by force was too high for Washington and many European capitals. The Obama administration limited itself to sanctions, freezing assets, travel bans, and kicking Russia out of the G8. NATO increased patrols in the Baltics and Poland, but there were no troops sent to Crimea itself. Why? Because sending troops would have meant massive bloodshed, a wider war, and a terrifying prospect of escalation. For many in Washington, risking that for distant Ukraine was politically and strategically unacceptable. Two realities emerged from 2014 that mattered for what came next. First, the West's response revealed a real hesitancy, strong rhetoric, limited action. This restraint became part of Moscow's strategic calculation. Second, Ukraine was exposed, not a NATO member, politically fractured, economically weak after the revolution, and an easy target when the moment arrived. One more factor is crucial for understanding the Kremlin's calculations, the US political context. At the time, the US Vice President was Joe Biden. Putin likely expected US leaders to keep later the same cautious approach he had seen from the Obama administration. In 2014, Biden did not break with Obama's restraint. The strongest public critic inside the Democratic Party was Hillary Clinton. She argued for a tougher response and she warned that Russia should be punished. But did Russia really want to be punished? Nope. So when came 2016, the presidential elections in the United States, Russia took steps to ensure Hillary would not be elected. US intelligence agencies later concluded that Russian actors ran a broad influence campaign aimed at the American election. They used hacking, trolls, and massive disinformation on social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and others, to sow confusion and division. The goal was clear: to weaken confidence in the democratic process and to amplify messages that hurt one candidate's standing. This wave of lies ranged from the plausible to absurd, conspiracy theories, smears, even grotesque fabrications. While the purpose was to damage one person, it was also an attempt to create chaos, distrust, and polarization. Did those operations help one candidate more than others? Many analysts say yes. The chaos favored Donald Trump, and his first term saw few serious new confrontations with Moscow. But the Democratic Party did not forget. The memory of foreign interference hardened resolve. When Joe Biden won in 2020, he was determined to change course. Biden and his advisors concluded something simple and stark. Putin must be checked by maximum pressure when necessary. That strategic shift is crucial to understanding what followed in 2022. Besides, Russian-linked actors have interfered across Europe too, and often in very visible ways. Back in 2016, the Brexit vote was target of massive online influence campaigns that amplified division. In 2017, Emmanuel Macron's campaign was hit by a major hack and a flood of stolen documents and disinformation just before the vote. Germany experienced cyber attacks, ongoing influence operations around its elections. In 2016, Montenegro authorities uncovered a plot linked to Russia aimed to topple the government ahead of pro-NATO vote. The Baltic states and Poland have long reported waves of disinformation designed to stoke fear, distrust, and anti-NATO sentiment. Across other parts of Europe, referendums, parliamentary races, and European Union level debates, investigators have documented similar patterns: hacked emails, troll farms, and targeted propaganda, pushing narratives useful to Moscow. Intelligence agencies and independent researchers have repeatedly connected these campaigns to Russian-linked networks. That pattern, using non-military tools to shape politics abroad, became part of the Kremlin's playbook. And nothing connects actors better than and makes alliances stronger than a common enemy. Russia and Putin became that enemy for Europe and for the United States, or at least for the Democratic Party of the United States and those who actually care about democracy and democratic processes. And that, arguably, was one of Putin's miscalculations. He expected Biden to follow the same cautious line he'd seen from Obama: restrained negotiations, limited risk of direct confrontation. But Biden and many European leaders moved differently. They hardened policy, coordinated more closely, and treated aggressive moves as strategic threats that needed stronger pushback. If the Kremlin saw opportunities in Western hesitation and in disunity, the Biden administration aimed to remove those openings. And a place where that contest would play out again was Ukraine. This was Word on Me project with Dr. Yeva Aleksanyan. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think? What else do you believe happened? And where do you see Putin's biggest miscalculations? Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.